Okay, so I will be evaluating Stephen on his strategic planning path. He's on level 2, speech 3, and the title is An Inconvenient Reflection. To me, Stephen has a very challenging speech today, but I know he's going to pull it off. It says, the purpose of this project is for the member to identify his or her own cultural identities and the stereotypes that impact others' perception of him or her. And it says the member will share some aspect of his or her cultural identity and the stereotypes that impact I'm reading the same thing. It says a culture is defined as a group with which a person associates. Some examples include country of origin, gender, being a member of a certain profession, religious affiliation, an animal lover, or a sports fan. So I know Stephen has been very reflective for this very challenging speech, but I know he will not be ineffable. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.
Good job. Yes, and so as Joanne said, the title is An Inconvenient Reflection. Let's welcome Stephen.
"2020, it's going to be one for the record books. You know, we've seen COVID, election, murder hornets, protests, and here in the Bay Area, wildfires. But those aren't the records I'm talking about. It's actually the ineffable transition of the American culture. And as many of you know, culture is really a collection of ideas, beliefs, values. It's also made up of different groups of people, which could be from a gender base, ethnicity, religion, and even thought process. And so today, I want you to ponder this thought. One of the greatest tragedies in life is to lose your own self and accept the version of you that is expected by everyone else. K.L. Paul. I spent a lot of time thinking about that particular quote and what it means, especially in these times. And I like to reflect on those and kind of tell you a little bit about myself, what I've seen, and what I plan to do for the future generations. So first, I'm California through and through. I was born here in the Bay Area, and I really respond and adhere to more of a California surfer, skateboarder type culture. So what does that mean? I'm rather open. I'm adventurous. I'm accepting of other perspectives and opinions. And I find myself, especially living in the melting pot of America, that I have a vast diversity of friends and thoughts from all different areas. It's not about a side, us versus them or anything. It's really, we're one and the same together. We're people trying to survive and live and be the best as a community. And that's really where I think I identify with the most. Now, as you could tell, for point number 2, the media and everything around us in the past 8 to 9 months has really been more about highly charged, sensitive opinions of other people. And that could be very difficult to interpret. So for example, we've heard a lot about different systemic racism or oppression in different cultures, very sensitive topics. We won't dive into the political aspects of that because that's not what we're about. That wastes everybody's time. But what we need to do is really dive into why is that bubbling up to the surface? What are people lacking? Or what are people, unbeknownst to them, not offering those other individuals to participate? So we really have to think through what that looks like. And I'll tell you a little bit about a story that impacted me very briefly. About 3 weeks ago, a car was leaving the complex I live in. The driver was most likely intoxicated. They ended up barreling through a fence about 500 feet away from my front door. As many of you know, I live in an RV, so My front door is only 10 feet in either direction. So it's not very big, right? Well, anyways, after the police and all the service people left, I went over there to check out the scene because I didn't want to be involved with all that chaos. And I was just examining the vehicle, looking at the poor fence that was ran over. And I guess the driver was there. And without really commenting, she started to engage with me, but in thoughts I wasn't prepared for. So her first statement was, "Are you just one of those Karens or Beckys that's here that's going to call the cops on us?" And I was really starstruck. It was ineffable. I couldn't figure out the words because I wasn't projecting any of those type of stereotypes that we hear today in the media. And for a moment, it actually set me off because I had to really reflect on who am I? Why would someone interpret that? And that's very difficult because now you're in a position that for some reason you almost have to feel defensive, but you don't need to because you just let it roll off your back. As such, I did. But we've seen that through and through. And it's brought me to the third point within my mental conversation is really an assessment of my own identity, my values, my beliefs, my thoughts, the community I have, and how I'm impacting the future generations, especially my children. What am I instilling in them? And so I look back to what I talked about in my first point: openness, communication, fairness, non-judgmental, accepting of everybody's opinion, and having more dialogue, not just being force-fed information and it's a cancel culture or us versus them, because that's not conversation. That's just some narrative that people are putting out there. And so in the past few weeks, it's been very difficult. I don't know how many of you have experienced something similar to that, or have actually gone through and reflected saying, holy crap, what is this chaos going on around me? I now have to do some internal thinking to understand how I fit into the world because it's evolving and I need to evolve too to be able to survive. Additionally, the people that follow behind me. So I'll leave you with that quote early on. Don't lose yourself in someone else's thoughts or expressions about you. Find your identity, stick with it, be true to yourself, and instill those values into the people and the community that mean the most to you. Madam Toastmaster.
I'd like to now call upon Joanne to give the evaluation on Stephen's speech.
Okay, thank you. This was a great speech. I mean, it was a very difficult topic, but I think Stephen really pulled it off. I really liked his organization because he opened up with all the 2020 things that are happening this year, like the protests and the wildfires and everything else, but he identified it as a transition of culture. I love the quote he gave. It was very appropriate about not losing yourself in the middle of all this. And he also identified his own culture as a surfer, which is open, adventurous, and he has a diverse group of friends. Very good. Then the best part, I think, of the speech was the story, because that story of him going to just look at a fence that had been crashed into in a car, and you're suddenly reduced to a stereotype just because you're there, and how it really made me feel how bewildering that would be. So I think that really showed the point of what this speech was supposed to be about. But he talked about staying, even when that happened, staying open and communicating and having acceptance. It's hard to say something to improve on this very difficult speech, but I think maybe when you give the quote, possibly slow down and pause and have vocal variety just to emphasize that quote so we could all absorb all of it, because it was very appropriate to what you were saying. let me see what else. So in conclusion, it was really important to show what it feels like to be reduced to a stereotype, which I think is hard to do, and talking about being open and communicating, and basically the quote, "Don't lose yourself in the middle of all this." Back to you, Madam General Evaluator.